What's up guys, welcome to the channel. I'm Joe and today I'm going to be smoking one of my favorite cuts of meat on the pit barrel cooker, and that is a pork loin. Alright, here's our pork loin. This is one of the most underrated cuts of meat you can cook. And with the times that they are now and meat prices soaring, I think this should be a more popular cut of meat for people to be smoking. I picked up this pork loin for $9.70. That's right, $9.70. It was on sale, $1.88 a pound. If you can't find it on sale, you can probably find this for around $2.99 a pound. That would put this piece of meat at about $15.50. Now that's not bad at all, because this is a super delicious cut of meat. Easy to cook, takes seasoning so well. So that being said, I'm going to show you how I like to cook this using the pit barrel cooker. It's absolutely delicious cut of meat. This is a little bit too big of a roast for me, so I'm going to cut this off. And the great thing about these pork loin roasts is the pieces you cut off of here can be delicious pork chops. Now, if you buy one of these roasts, you can turn this whole thing into pork chops, and you can cut them as thick or as thin as you like. You could probably get about 10 pork chops out of this one piece of meat. For a little under 10 bucks, you really can't beat that. I'm gonna trim off a couple pork chops from here, then we'll get it seasoned. I've already got my pit barrel lit up. I'm gonna be using hickory wood chunks today. So let's get to trimming and seasoning this piece of pork loin. Let's start with making this barbecue rub. I'm just winging this rub, so we're not gonna have any precise measurements. I'll try and do my best to tell you what I think it is. Start off with some black pepper. I don't know, a couple tablespoons maybe. Some onion powder, a couple teaspoons maybe. Same thing with some garlic powder, maybe a tablespoon. And some paprika, again, maybe a tablespoon or so. I wanna add a little chili powder, a couple teaspoons. Then just a little bit of this ground jalapeno, a little spice. You could add cayenne if you want. All right, so no salt. I'm gonna add the salt separately. Let's give this a mix. All right, so just a couple more things. I wanna add a little more paprika. I want a little more color in this. Also, wanna add a little bit of brown sugar for some sweetness. All right, now let's mix this up. All right, there we have it. That's the color I'm looking for. That's why I add a little bit more of that paprika. Looking for that nice red barbecue rub color. Let's get this pork loin cut up and we'll get it seasoned. Pork loin, let's get to work. Now you can see it's got a fat cap on one side, no fat on the other. There's not much trimming to do on these. Another great thing about them, it's got a little bit of excess here. So like I said before, this is a little too big for me. There's no need for me to just cook this roast. I like to do it a little smaller. You may need to do the roast this big. This might be the right size for you, and you're gonna have no problem cooking this. For me, I want a little smaller, so I'm gonna cut myself a couple nice pork chops from the ends. Who wouldn't want that as a nice thick pork chop grilled up on the grill? Come on. So I'm cutting it from the ends just so this will be nice and squared off. Still a little big for me. I'll cut a couple more chops off of here. Again, look at this beautiful pork chop. Cut them as thick or as thin as you like. So I think that's pretty good for me. Like how that looks. All right, so there's a couple things I want to do to this pork loin before we season it. First thing I like to do is score this fat cap. This lets the seasoning get in here real nice. This fat renders down a lot better this way. Big fan of doing this on the pork loin. Plus it kind of gives it that nice look, like you know what you're doing kinda. All right, now the last thing I want to do is get some butcher's twine and just tie this up to make it a nice round roast. Again, don't have to do that. It'll be a much better presentation if you do. So I'm just gonna lay down this twine like so. Then I'll bring our roast over, lay it on top. All right, then we'll just trussle this up. Very simple. That's how I like to do it. Wrap it around twice. Pull it tight, twist it like that so it stays, and then just tie another knot. This doesn't need to be crazy tight, just trying to give it a nice round shape. Try to turn this so you can see this one. Wrap it around twice, pull it tight, then spin it like so. Now it'll stay like that, and then just tie another knot. Let's go ahead and cut the excess. All right, that's that. So we're ready to season this pork loin. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and salt this first because I did not add any salt to my rub. I like using this Malden's flaky salt. It's not too salty and I like the coarseness of it. If you've never tried this flaky salt, I really recommend it. It's a big cut of meat, it can use plenty of salt, so don't worry about that. All right, now let's get that barbecue rub we just made. Remember, there's no salt in here, so you can go pretty heavy if you're gonna use this. It's all just flavor. I like to just go ahead and roll this on the board, get all that extra seasoning. Don't want to waste any of this stuff. There's our beautiful pork loin. So this is ready for the smoker. Since I'm using the pit barrel and we have that heat source right underneath the grate, I'm gonna go ahead and put this fat side down. That'll let all this fat render nicely and protect the meat. I'll meet you out at the pit barrel and we'll get this on. All right, let's get this pork on the pit barrel. Got some nice smoke already. Like I just said, we're putting this fat side down. There we go. All right, so we got that pork loin on the pit barrel cooker. Time-wise, probably a couple hours. More importantly, I'm gonna be going by the internal temperature of this. So for a long time, people have been cooking their pork to an internal temperature of 160 degrees. Recently, they came out and said that we can cook our pork to 145 degrees safely. If you've been cooking your pork to 160 degrees, you've probably had some dry pork loins and dry pork tenderloins. But now we know that we can safely cook our pork to 145 degrees. We can enjoy some delicious, juicy pork. So I'm gonna be putting one of my thermometers into this to track. I have a couple thermometers. This is one that I like to use. It's a meter probe. I'm sure you've seen it. They're pretty pricey. What I like about this is there are no wires. Messing around with those wires can be a pain. I also have an Inkbird that does have wires, and I use both thermometers. When I'm running my offset smoker and I got a piece of meat in there and I wanna see what the temperature the smoker's running, I'll use my Inkbird because I have 4 probes that come off that. It's also more dependable Bluetooth wise because it has a longer range. The block for this meter probe needs to be very close to where this is. The problem I have is this needs to be basically next to the smoker for this to communicate with this. If I'm in the house, I still have to be pretty close to this block to be able to communicate with it. So I've had some connectivity issues and I'm not that far away from it. If that's not a problem, I still like to use this just because it's easy to use. No wires, very simple to clean. The other thing I don't like about this thermometer is how thick this is. If you stick this in your raw piece of meat and throw it on your smoker, say I took that pork loin and I stuck this through the side into the middle of that pork loin. Now, when I cut that pork loin into slices, it's gonna have a huge hole in the middle of each piece. So what I found is I can stick it through the top, so there's only that one section that's gonna have this big gaping hole in it. If you have a beautiful ribeye steak and you shove this through the side, each individual piece that you cut off is gonna have this big hole in it. So if I have a nice piece of steak or something I know that I'm gonna be presenting, I'll use my Inkbird because the probes on that are much more thin. Anyway, so I'm gonna let the pork loin cook for a little bit before I put this in, just to try and prevent that hole from being too big. That's how I'm gonna be monitoring this temperature. So once I get to around 145 degrees, I'm gonna pull this pork loin roast off, let it rest for a while. You can probably pull this off around 140 and have no problem with the carryover heat. So when this pork loin is almost finished, I will see you guys out at the smoker. All right, pork's been on for about an hour and a half. Let's give it a look. So about 15 minutes ago, I flipped it over to try and get a little bit more crust buildup on the other side, but this is looking good. All right, so this is reading 145. I'm gonna pull it off, let it rest for half an hour, and then I'll see you when I slice it up. All right, that pork loin's done. It's been sitting, resting for about a half an hour. Before I go get it and we slice into this, I'd like to say thanks for watching the video. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. If you have, please subscribe, like the video. You can follow me on Instagram at SmokestackJoes. So thanks for watching. Let me go get this pork loin so we can slice into it and see how this thing came out. All right, this smells so good. Let's get these strings off so I can feel this fat is rendered beautifully. All right, let's slice into this. Oh yeah, look at that. It's got a nice crust on here, super juicy. Take a look at that, absolutely juicy. Man, this is why pork loin is so good. And when you're not cooking it to 160 degrees, these are the results you'll get. Super juicy, absolutely delicious pork loin. So let's give this a try. This smells great, it looks delicious. Of course, I'm having the end piece because I love this bark on here. So this is also gonna be the most dry part of this. So if this is juicy, the whole thing is gonna be absolutely delicious. Let's give this a try. So good. I'm just gonna have another piece. 2 thumbs up. Because we cut that fat cap, all those little edges in those squares got nice and crispy. The crispy pork fat is so good, soaks up all that seasoning, and that barbecue rub we made is absolutely delicious. So I highly suggest giving that a shot. More importantly, this is a delicious cut of meat. It's super juicy, super tender. It builds up a beautiful crust using that pit barrel cooker. For $9.70, you really can't beat this. Even if you paid $15 for this. It's such a large quantity of meat for such a little price. Look at this roast. It's a big roast. This could feed a lot of people. Plus I have all those pork chops that I sliced off this as well. You guys got to try a pork loin. So once again, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and follow me on Instagram. Gonna have a bunch of good stuff coming out. Most importantly, get out there and smoke something good.